Okay, so you're an automobile manufacturer and you make automobiles as part of your business. Now, normally you guys would not make one or two automobiles per year. You guys generally make these in the order of hundreds of thousands per year from multiple sites around the world. This requires a massive supply chain as well as very impressive and significant manufacturing capabilities. Unfortunately, the reality is today is that manufacturing today is not the same as manufacturing 10 to 15 years ago. The landscape has changed and the environment has changed. The European Chemicals Agency, ECHA, which I'm sure you're all well aware, has created this environmental regulation called REACH, which requires all manufacturers who produce things in Europe and who import to Europe to know what's on their product to 0.1% weight over weight of various substances. Some of these substances include chrome, cadmium, refractory ceramic fibers, and there's also hundreds more that are on this list that are currently being regulated, and dozens more which are currently on the list and to be proposed to be regulated. So this really requires manufacturers to understand what's inside of their product. Now, if you're working in environmental health and safety, you'll probably raise your hand and say, well, hold on. We don't only have to worry about REACH. Although REACH is a major concern, it's not the only one. We also have to worry about air quality, water quality, wastes, recycling, and many other environmental regulations around the world. If you look at what's happening in South Korea is also making their own REACH. So if you want to export to South Korea, they'll have their own regulations you have to worry about. China is also in the process of increasing the sophistication of their environmental regulations. So all of this means is you have to look out not only what's going on inside of your borders, what's going on in other countries as well to know whether you can export to them and what are the risks of manufacturing in these areas. So this raises a whole lot of questions with concerns as what's inside of your product. How confident are all the manufacturers out there with what's inside of their product? So in order to answer this question, let's take a look at what actually is inside the product. So if we look at a vehicle, we realize there is a lot of data inside of this. And you really have to love your data because there are hundreds to thousands of chemicals that go into making an automobile. And these come from hundreds to thousands of suppliers. So the question becomes, how are we going to collect, store, manage, and communicate this data in the most effective manner? How can we do this with the best economies and also use this data to add value to our other operations? Just creating a data dump where the data will be used for generating reports and not being used for anything else, in my opinion, is perhaps not the most efficient way of doing this. Now, when you're looking at all this, you're going to say, well, this is a rather big burden. We have a lot of information to worry about. We have a lot of business actions we have to take care of. What's the best way to do this? Is there a best way to do this? Well, don't panic. Grab a towel. We here at ERA think there is a best way to do it, and we're going to talk a bit about that inside of our processes. So the ideal solution is understanding what is the chemical bill of materials of all your products. That lets you answer all of the product-specific regulations. This is a term that I affectionately refer to as 100% chemistry. What's the best way to get to this 100% chemistry of your product? So how does this relate to your vehicle? Well, in order to understand what goes into this vehicle, we first have to understand what goes into our manufacturing facility. Now, this might seem like a very daunting task, but in reality, we only have to answer two questions. First question is, what goes into our facility and what happens to it after it enters our facility? Now, I don't mean to oversimplify, but these two questions actually have a lot of complexity into these and understanding where this comes from. So our software is going to look at the supplier portion of this first. So in this case, we're going to look at metal coils and metal sheets, which are the primary components for your automobile manufacturing. So we take our supplier portal and we tell all of your suppliers to put information in there based off various factors. So one of the ways we can do this is we can tell them to tell us what spec or what the material is. So in this case, the supplier is going to import high strength, low alloy steel, in this case 942C. Now, the problem with doing this by spec is that there's a maximum range. You know that there is somewhere between 0 and 0.21% carbon, 0 and 1.35% magnesium, et cetera, et cetera. You don't really know exactly where it is, but it's somewhere in that range. Now, if you're dealing with low volumes and relatively benign substances such as carbon, phosphorus, sulfur inside hard materials, over-reporting is not so bad because you're not really reporting anything dangerous. And if you're using relatively low volumes, then having your supplier give you the information by spec is fine. However, if you're dealing with something a bit more innoxious, such as manganese, chrome, things like that, then you may want to be more precise on what you're doing. So in this example here, we allow suppliers to give us information by batch. Not all steel is created equal. Not all steel specs are equal. For the first 3 samples, these are all from the exact same spec. And you'll notice the third column, manganese, is significantly different in all 3, up to 25% difference between sample 1 and 2. Now, if I'm in the environmental health and safety department and I'm looking at this, and I have to account for the maximum to make sure that I report for everything, because the penalties for underreporting are rather severe. So I report maximums generally. However, if I have the capacity to know exactly what's inside each batch, I can say for batch 1, all products made from batch 1 have this environmental impact. All products made from batch 2 have this environmental impact. So I'm now working with actuals opposed to ranges based off what my supplier was able to provide me. Now, not every supplier is going to have this detailed information for every batch, but for the ones who are capable of producing this information, we allow you the ability to store it and track it and make sure that you can make your environmental reports based off of it. If we look at sample number 4, which is a corrosion resistant steel, which has a high magnesium or high manganese, high chrome, this lets me identify exactly which processes use this material and make sure that only those products that use this material are using it for their reports. So it helps me avoid the pitfall of over-reporting various substances. In reality, your facility might be using a lot less of hazardous materials than you would suspect. So that's how we get information onto the facility. And I've shown you, and I've outlined how we would do it for steel. But how we would do it for steel is the exact same way as how we would do it for chemical coatings. It's the exact same way we would do it for components such as tires or sound systems. We give the portal to suppliers, we train them the best way to how to put the information into it, and you gain that level of accuracy for all of your product or all the suppliers that provide you with materials. So that's how we get information onto the facility, and that helps us with the suppliers. Now, if we look at the process portion of it, we have to understand exactly what happens to these materials after they enter your facility. So once again, we're going to take a look at the steel. Now, if you're bringing these steel onto sites, there's a pretty good chance that you might heat it at some point while it's on the facility. As you're heating it, there's going to be combustion and there's going to be combustion emissions. If you have having combustion on site, chances are you have storage tanks to store the fuel. That's going to result in tank emissions for the air. It's going to result in water emissions as well on the ground from spills and incidents. If you push this material a bit further through your facility into the stamping phase, your stamping actions are going to generate particulate matter. That particulate matter is going to fall on the floor, which is going to require you to have water reports, and you're also going to have residual materials and recyclables coming from these actions as well. We provide you with the capacity to take all this information, put it into our system, and make your appropriate reports and declarations. If you have bonding actions, such as welding, we track the emissions from that as well. Same thing for the water emissions and water effluent. Now, not only do we help you map out what happens to your products, but we also help you map out what happens to the manufacturing equipment that goes into your products. You have maintenance activities you have to do on site. You have greasers, degreasers, lubricants, and a whole series of other chemicals that are used to help maintain your equipment. So we help you map out the emissions and the VOCs from these products. Same thing for the waste and the recyclable materials and residuals. When it comes time before your product leaves the door, it also has to go through a paint shop. We help you track the VOCs with emission factors, and we track your wastewater and your residual materials as well from that. So the end result is we take all processes. I only mapped out one here, but we can actually do the exact same thing for any process you have in your facility. Map it out step by step and separate it into your air, water, and residual materials. If we take a closer look at the air, we allow you to take air samples on site, take that information, put it into our system for tracking. We track your scrubber efficiencies, we track your emission factors, and we track your transfer efficiencies on your coating lines. Once all this is summed up for all of your processes, you end up with very, very detailed information on what's happening for your air emissions. For your water emissions, we allow you to take all your lab results from your wastewater effluents, whether you yourself produce them or whether you have them outsourced by a third party. We allow that information to be put into our system and make your various reports. If there's a threshold, if you trigger a threshold on a particular time frame, reports will be sent out to everybody saying wastewater on this time frame exceeded a certain limit, please report. And we make sure everybody has visibility on who has that action and what's happening to that action. Now, for residual materials, if any material leaves your facility by truck, whether it's a recycling truck, whether it's waste management, hazardous materials, we let you track what volume is in the truck, where it's going, when it left. And what this means is that you can have very detailed information on everything that leaves your facility. So once again, you have the ability to know exactly what's happening in your air, what's happening in your water, and what's happening for your recyclables. The sum of all this tells us we now know what's exactly happening inside of our manufacturing processes. We now have this second piece of the puzzle. See, I told you it wasn't so bad. Once we have these two pieces of the puzzle, we can now say what's going on for the whole facility. Now, this is very important because when I mentioned before, in order to know what's going on our vehicles, we need to know what's in our facility. So we have the facility data, so we can now say what's inside of our car because we now know the alloy composition that went into it, we know what it was coated with, and we now know all the manufacturing inputs that went into its creation, and it's all rolled up automatically into a chemical bill of materials for that product. Now, because we attach a unique ID to every product coming out of any of your processes, we can also say what material inventory happens by production number. So this group of vehicles has this environmental impact. This group of vehicles has this environmental impact. And that can be said for any product that leaves your facility. And as you may guess, a lot of this information can also be used for generating life cycle analysis for your products. It's not a full cradle to grave analysis, but it's definitely a cradle to gate analysis. Everything that went into your product up until the point that it left your facility, you can now account for with actuals, opposed to using databases that have rough estimates. We now know exactly what's inside your product as it's leaving. And we're approaching 100% chemistry. We don't know down to the molecular formula everything into your vehicle because our information is based off what your suppliers know, but we do provide the capacity to get as close as possible based on supplier info. And when we go back to our facility, not only can we make product declarations, we can now make environmental declarations based off our facility. We can make our air emissions reports, we can make our effluent water reports, and our recycling and waste reports. So when we look back to the concerns that the Environmental Health and Safety Department had before, they wanted to handle all of these. Well, we can now handle REACH because we mapped everything out and we now know what's on your product. We now know what's going on in your facility, so we can do the air quality, water quality, wastes, recycling. And because the software is so exhaustive and expansive and can do so much, we're also setting ourselves up to be able to deal with any future environmental regulations. If new hazardous materials become regulated, our system will be able to handle that, and as well as anything else that comes out. Conflict minerals, another big portion that our software can handle. Because we ask our suppliers already a series of questions, it's literally just adding that extra question on and adding a separate list. Now, I mentioned before that we're not just trying to create a data dump. The goal of this is not just to have information that's only used for reporting. What is the extra value of this information? Well, at the enterprise level, it gives you the corporate level transparency. You now know what's happening in various facilities at a glance from a corporate dashboard. You can sit down at your computer and say how each of your facilities are performing environmentally. If facility A is performing very well, you will be able to see that. If facility B is not performing as well as you would expect, you can then see exactly which areas need improvement and you can address those on your own timetable. It also gives you the ability to identify best practices between facilities. Once again, if you look at facility A and B that do relatively similar processes but have significantly different environmental impacts, you can start analyzing what is the cause of these changes and how do we improve them, and if there is a best practices to help you implement them across the rest of your facilities. It also gives you the information required to make annual corporate social responsibility reports, and because as it facilitates the accounting and the reporting. Now, we don't generate CSR reports, but we do have the ability to give you the information required to do the environmental portions of it relatively quickly. Now, for the people actually on site inside the manufacturing facilities, because you have all this extra data and the extra resolution, you now have more information to perform better waste reduction actions. You have the ability to identify hazards on site significantly easier because you know exactly what processes use what substances. And you can identify inefficiencies easier because you have more information. The overall goal of this is to reduce the time from your staff to make the environmental reports and give them the level of resolution needed to take that extra time and use it effectively to help increase the value to your company, both at the facility level and at the enterprise level across multiple sites. Thank you very much.